We've gotten a political and tourism perspective on the matter, but does the sports fraternity have a say at all? I'm joined in studio by eNCA sports editor Vata Ngobeni to discuss this even further. Vata, good evening and thank you so much for your time. We heard the words irrational being used by Brand Africa founder Tebe Ekalafeng, the minister using the words invalid and unconstitutional. Could this have been a good deal at all?
I think, Tumelo, in a different time, in South Africa's political and economic landscape, this would have been probably a very, very good deal. It would have even been a better deal when you mention other names of teams that are playing in the English Premiership. But however, under the economic stress that the country is under, and the citizens of the country to be taking public money and going to spend it on one entity and so much of it, it leaves a sour taste in the mouths of South Africans. And I like what Tebe said there. It's tone deaf. And it came at a time, I remember listening to acting CEO of South African Tourism, Themba Khumalo, and how he said, I'll look into the camera, there's money for potholes, there's money allocated for ESCOM and so on. This is, and unfortunately, you cannot make light of serious issues that South Africans are grappling with. I think from a sporting context, there'll be many other more, I think, sporting properties that SA Tourism could have gone with. And it's very unfortunate because they didn't even consult, the sports fraternity. And we've had specialists, sponsor specialists on air today, the likes of Calvin Watt and so on. And they'll tell you, there would have been other sporting properties that you could have invested in, they would have had the same effect that you're looking for by sponsoring Tottenham.
And I suppose that was going to be my next question, right? Because, I mean, the sports calendar this year is quite massive, even in South Africa alone, with the various World Cups, championships happening, women's sports, spearheading sports in South Africa at the moment. Could there have been other teams, I suppose that's the question, sports, fraternities that they could have considered? And how far could it have stretched them, perhaps even better than what they had reimagined with Tottenham Hotspur?
Without a doubt, I think to me, you only have to look at what just happened this year, last month, with the ICC Cricket Women's World Cup, T20 World Cup, and South Africa being the first cricket team, men and women, to reach a World Cup final. Wow. And it was done on home soil. There was a perfect opportunity to take some money and put it into that women's team that is doing so well at the moment. That's now already imported a lot of players into the Indian Premier League. We saw Marzan Cup doing well for her team and qualifying for the final there. And again, when we speak about, especially now, there's a big movement towards bringing women's sport to parity with the men's sport when it comes to pay and everything else. The opportunity was there with the Cricket World Cup. Yeah. We speak about the Pro League. When it comes to hockey, our men's team could not play in the Pro League. That is played in the territories that SA Tourism has been talking about and want to expose South Africa to. We couldn't go there because there's all they need was 10 million rand to get into the participation there. And you're talking about 900 million. Yeah. What would have been 20, 30 million of that money and put it into hockey? We just had the Hockey World Indoor World Cup hosted here in South Africa. Top goal scorer, Mustafa Kasim, South African, one of the shining lights of hockey in world hockey. Is a South African. And again, that World Cup was here in Pretoria. And then we've got the Netball World Cup coming up. You can't get bigger, than that when you come to women's sport. Right. And we're hosting it in Cape Town. And then you've got the FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. Banyana being the African champions. Second consecutive World Cup they're participating in. Surely, that's another low-hanging fruit that you could have gone for. And the big one would have been the Rugby World Cup. South Africa, the defending world champions. They go there with the man who was the first black man to lift the Webb Ellis Trophy. His story is being told in the Americas, in Asia. The world is lapping up Siya Kolisi and his team. Yeah. Why not put your badge on there? Because that is a South African gift that is selling across the world. If you want to promote South Africa, promote it with South African institutions. And you've got these sporting codes, especially the Cinderella sporting codes, that are begging for money. Yeah. And that 900 million, you could have taken half of it. And you would have sorted out the problems of the likes of swimming, of hockey, of athletics, of netball. The issues that were sorted out for at least 5 years. So for me, I think, not that, forget that it was done in bad taste and it was tone deaf and so on.
Right.
And obviously now it's said to be irregular. You know, there were other better ways of spending the money and keeping it within the country as well.
And what does it say to you? I mean, speaking of what the minister had to say, deeming it both invalid and unlawful, we have seen a suspension of the acting CFO, Johan van der Walt, and some resignation even at the SA Tourism Board, which the minister says she's looking into. What does it say about that particular deal, the proposal, the conversations in the room that have led now to the result we're seeing today?
I think the microscope now should be under the who runs South African tourism. You know, I think that the deal itself was dead in the water from the onset. In how they failed, I think, to follow process. We saw the previous minister, Linda Sulu, who pleaded, you know, ignorance. And this deal had said to be almost, you know, over the line. From our correspondents out in London. And unfortunately, when those 3 board members resigned, and then information came out that the acting CFO had some sort of involvement or holding in the agency that was brokering this deal. After Themba Khumalo had said that there was no one brokering this deal. You know, it was a direct conversation between Tottenham Hotspurs and SA Tourism. And then to me, what I was extremely sad was the fact that they launched a forensic investigation into who the whistleblower could be. I mean, instead of saluting the whistleblower and saying, well done, you know, for laying bare something that is now, again, deemed to be irregular, you know, you go after the whistleblower. You know, this is a problem with corruption in this country. In general, we've seen so many whistleblowers, you know, going into hiding and so on. And again, I think this highlights, you know, how some of our SOEs are being run, and we need to look deeply into how they're run and where they actually take, because this is public money at the end of the day. You know, so I think the microscope really should be on how this entity is being run. And when you talk about acting CEO, acting chief of strategy, acting CFO, there's a problem. You should have people in permanent positions in those institutions.
Absolutely. There's the first problem there, all the acting positions we're seeing within the organizations. Before I let you go, we spoke about the budget, 1 billion rand. You said at least half of it, some of it could have gone somewhere. What about sports development? How far are we in making those gains? I mean, from school level, we've heard by Nyazali Sufi trying to implement that every Wednesday, you know, from ECD level, there needs to be at least a sports day dedicated to sports development. But nationally, how are we faring as South Africans to at least grow a sporting culture in the country that's also attractive and lucrative outside the borders of the country?
Tumelo, we're in big trouble. We need to say it the way it is. We're in big trouble. It is the same for multi schools and private schools that are now the pipeline, that have been the pipeline and continue to be the pipeline for your bigger sporting codes like your rugby's and your cricket and hockeys and so on. And when it comes to football, you know, the School of Excellence, it's in tatters. You know, our football development structures are nowhere in this country. You know, and again, we've heard former players saying, you need to go back to grassroots. But the big problem then comes in, because when you want to tap into schools, you've got to deal with the unions. Because, and we've got to face it, we've got to face the facts. You know, a lot of the teachers' unions and so on are a hindrance in making sure that kids stay over for cultural stuff, stay over for sporting events, because the coaches are the teachers, you know. And a lot of teachers will pick up and say, I'm not going to be here from 7 in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's where the first problem starts. So there's a lot of hindrance when it comes. And then you see the Department of Sports and Recreation, Arts and Culture. You've got to have a minister who has got a vested interest in sport. Steve Tshwete had a vested interest in sport. Nqonde Powerful had a vested interest in Makengetsa. These are people who had credentials within sport back in the days, prior to coming into government, you know. So if you don't have someone who is fully immersed in sport, you're still going to have these problems. We still talk about development, we still talk about transformation. And I heard the new minister talking, you know, and said transformation. We've got to move past that. We've seen a federation that's been beaten about transformation, rugby, which has made huge strides. And we're seeing a lot of our sporting codes making big strides when it comes to transformation. At the end of the day, we've got to move away from that and get down to the nitty-gritty of it. And development is the nitty-gritty of it. Without it, Tumelo, we are not going to have your Caster Semenya, you're not going to have your Themba Bavumas and your Siya Kolisi's, because that's where they come from, the grassroots.
Hopefully, of course, someone is listening to this conversation and something will be done in terms of implementation. Vata Ngobeni, thank you so much for your time. eNCA Sports Editor, talking to us about, the Tottenham Hotspur deal, at the back of what the minister had to say, calling that deal both invalid and unlawful. We've heard the backing of different, experts and leaders in the tourism sector. Brand Africa's Tebe Kalafeng say it's an irrational decision and proposal that was made in the first place. So I suppose that puts it to bed now.